The Cedar Hollow HOA told me to tear down my grandfather's fire watchtower in the middle of peak wildfire season because they thought it was ugly. That's the short version. The longer version is somehow even crazier because 72 hours after they sent me the legal notice demanding I remove it, the whole neighborhood was standing in a gravel parking lot looking up at that same tower like their lives depended on it. And honestly, they kind of did. My name's Ethan Calloway. I'm 36, and I work as a wildfire mitigation specialist outside Durango, Colorado. Been doing forest management and fire mapping for over a decade, which basically means I spend a lot of time thinking about how fast things can go wrong in dry mountain country. My grandfather understood that before anybody around here did. Back in 1971, before Cedar Hollow had paved roads or luxury gates or a board of people obsessing over approved trim colors, he built a 48-foot watchtower on our ridge. Nothing fancy. Thick cedar beams, hand-cut braces, iron bolts, and a narrow spiral staircase that creaked loud enough to wake a bear. It overlooked thousands of acres of timber and a valley that funneled wind straight through the mountains. Grandpa used to say, "If you can see the ridge, you can save the ridge." He lived by that. The tower stayed. Years passed. Developers came in. Then came million-dollar homes, giant windows, designer decks, landscaping crews every Friday. Cedar Hollow turned into one of those mountain communities where every house somehow looked expensive and intentionally casual at the same time. Gray stone, black trim, perfect gravel. And right in the center of it all sat Grandpa's tower, weathered and dark and stubborn as hell. He passed 2 years ago and left the property to me. 3 acres, a maintenance road, and the tower. What most people didn't know was that in 2020 he upgraded it. He installed 4 solar-powered cameras with thermal sensors and full panoramic sweep. They could detect heat signatures across almost 7 miles and send live feed directly to La Plata County Fire Command. He paid for all of it himself. Never charged a dime. Never bragged about it either. That was Grandpa. Quiet guy. Help first, talk later. I kept everything running after he passed. Mostly because it mattered, but partly because every time I climbed those stairs and heard the wood creak under my boots, it still felt like he was there. Then came Trevor Ashford. Trevor was HOA Architectural Committee Chair. Mid-50s, clean haircut, expensive fleece vest even in July, smile that somehow felt like paperwork. He lived 3 houses downhill in a glass and steel place that looked like a boutique hotel. We'd barely spoken before. Just nods. Quick hellos. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I pulled into my driveway and found a certified envelope taped to my gate. I knew before opening it I wasn't going to like it. Notice of architectural violation. Article 11 Exterior Visual Compliance. They said the tower was inconsistent with neighborhood standards, disruptive to property values, and required removal or redesign within 30 days. Failure to comply would trigger legal action and fines. The timestamp on the notice read July 18th. Triple-digit heat wave. Red flag warnings all week. The mountain had been bone dry since May. I read it twice standing there in the sun and actually laughed because it felt too stupid to be real. Tear down the fire tower during wildfire season. I called Trevor. He answered on speaker. I could hear golf clubs rattling in the background. "Trevor, tell me this is a joke." He gave me this calm HOA voice and said, "Ethan, nobody's questioning your family history here. It simply doesn't align with current visual guidelines." I looked straight at the tower and said, "That structure sends wildfire surveillance to County Fire Command." Silence. Then he goes, "That may be true, but the board wasn't informed of that when reviewing compliance." I said, "So you threatened to sue first and ask questions later?" He sighed like I was inconveniencing him. "We all make sacrifices for community standards." That line sat with me. Community standards. I hung up and immediately called Battalion Chief Elena Ramirez at County Fire. She picked up fast. I asked, hypothetically, if my tower feed disappeared tonight, how bad would that be? She didn't even hesitate. Bad enough that I'd lose my best visual on North Ridge. I asked if there was backup. Nope. Aircraft can't always fly. Cell towers are unreliable up there. Your grandfather built the only clean line of sight we've got. Then she paused and added, "Please tell me this is hypothetical." I stared at Trevor's letter and said, "Not exactly." That night I sat at Grandpa's old workbench with the notice on one side and camera diagnostics on the other. I kept thinking about Trevor saying sacrifice like this tower was decorative, like history and utility were somehow negotiable because the cedar stain didn't match somebody's landscaping Pinterest board. And then another thought hit me. If they believed the tower violated HOA standards, then why exactly was I still providing free infrastructure through it? Around midnight, I drafted one email. Subject line, temporary suspension of fire observation services. I addressed the HOA board, copied every homeowner listed in the directory, and copied Chief Ramirez. Then I wrote exactly what they needed to hear. Due to legal notice requiring removal or alteration of the structure identified as Cedar Watchtower, all fire observation and surveillance services will be suspended immediately pending resolution of ownership and liability concerns. At sunrise, I climbed the stairs, shut down all 4 cameras, disconnected the uplink antenna, locked the gate, and walked back down. The mountain was dead quiet. No birds, just dry wind pushing through the trees. Around 10 that morning, I got my first HOA group text alert. Someone spotted smoke west of Timberline Ridge. By lunch, the neighborhood chat was exploding. People were posting pictures of haze over the trees, asking if the cameras were offline, asking who had access, asking why county hadn't issued visuals yet. I made coffee and sat on the porch. Then Trevor called, then called again, then again. I let it ring, because for the first time since Grandpa died, Cedar Hollow was finally noticing what that old tower actually meant. And things were about to get a whole lot louder. By early afternoon, the haze had thickened enough to dull the sunlight over Cedar Hollow, and when mountain sunlight starts turning orange before dinner, everybody notices. I had just stepped back into the workshop when Trevor finally caught me in person. He came up my gravel drive faster than I'd ever seen him move, expensive hiking shoes coated with dust, phone in one hand, and irritation all over his face. "Ethan," he snapped, trying real hard to sound calm. "This isn't helping." I leaned against Grandpa's workbench and said, "Funny, that letter didn't feel especially helpful either." He held up his phone. I could hear voices shouting through the HOA group call. Residents are panicking. I shrugged. Seems like maybe the board should have been informed before reviewing compliance. He stared at me for a second, and I could actually see the moment he realized I was quoting his own words back at him. His jaw tightened. "Look, nobody anticipated." "Exactly," I cut in. "You didn't ask." He lowered his voice like we were negotiating something private. "Turn the system back on, and we can revisit the paperwork." That made me laugh. "Trevor, your board sent a legal threat. You made liability an issue. You called the structure non-compliant. So I'm protecting myself." He muttered something under his breath and walked off looking like he wanted to throw his phone into the trees. 20 minutes later, Chief Ramirez texted me directly. "Smoke confirmed 6 miles west. No flame visible yet. Aircraft delayed because gusts were climbing fast." She didn't ask me to turn the feed back on. She just wrote, "We're adjusting with what we have. Wish we had your tower." That hit harder than Trevor's call, because I knew what that meant. Crews were losing precious minutes. And around here, minutes matter. By sunset, ash was drifting through the neighborhood. Tiny gray flakes landing on black SUVs and polished deck furniture like winter arriving wrong. The HOA chat had turned ugly. One homeowner blamed Trevor directly. Another asked why the board targeted a fire watchtower in July. Somebody else posted a screenshot of my email and wrote in all caps, "You threatened the wrong man." Then came day 2, and that was when panic stopped being theoretical. At 8:15 a.m., La Plata County issued a wildfire preparedness advisory for all homes within 10 miles of North Ridge. Not evacuation yet, but close enough to make every luxury homeowner suddenly remember they lived in a forest. Then insurance companies started calling. Apparently, without active fire monitoring in the area, Cedar Hollow got flagged for increased wildfire exposure. One by one, people got notices. Premium increases. Policy reviews. Threats of non-renewal. 30% here. 40% there. I watched neighbors pace their driveways with phones pressed to their ears, looking like they'd aged 5 years overnight. Around 4 that afternoon, I drove into the mail kiosk parking lot and found a crowd gathered near Trevor's SUV. Maybe 12 people. Maybe more. Trevor stood in the middle, trying to talk over everybody. A woman named Claire Donnelly, retired surgeon with zero patience for nonsense, was pointing toward my ridge. "You threatened the one thing protecting this neighborhood because you didn't like the paint color?" Trevor tried explaining architectural consistency. Claire barked a laugh and said, "Architectural consistency isn't gonna save my roof." I almost kept driving. Almost. But Trevor saw me and immediately called out, "Ethan, maybe you can clarify the status of the equipment." Everybody turned. Whole parking lot went silent. I stepped out and said, "Sure. The tower's inactive until liability and compensation are resolved." Trevor crossed his arms. Compensation. I pulled a folder from my truck. Grandpa kept records on everything. Solar upgrades. Maintenance logs. Replacement batteries. Hardware. Internet service. Monitoring. I handed Trevor the printed numbers. Your neighborhood has benefited from wildfire surveillance for 6 years. Comparable private systems bill around $2,700 a month. Total unpaid service value comes to a little over $300,000. Trevor looked like I'd slapped him. Claire leaned over his shoulder and whistled. Then I kept going. Future monitoring under formal contract would run $9,200 monthly, with guaranteed access and emergency support. Or, I paused and looked at everybody there. I've had interest from a private wildfire analytics company out of Santa Fe. They'd pay for exclusive feed rights. Trevor stepped toward me. That sounds an awful lot like extortion. I looked him dead in the eye. No. What extortion sounds like is threatening legal action against critical infrastructure during fire season. You could feel the whole crowd shift. Trevor knew it too. Nobody defended him. Nobody said a word. He got in his SUV and peeled out hard enough to spray gravel. That night wind came hard through the valley. Branches scraping windows. Dry needles skittering across roofs. Around 5:30 the next morning my phone buzzed with an emergency county alert. Fire had jumped North Ridge. Containment line compromised. Evacuation level 2 for Cedar Hollow. Prepare immediately. I was already awake. The sky had that ugly copper color mountains get when fire and sunrise mix together. You never forget it once you've seen it. I climbed halfway up Grandpa's tower and looked west. There it was. Smoke column pushing over the ridge. Wind driving east. Faster than I liked. My chest tightened. For 1 second, I considered powering the cameras back up myself. Just do it. Forget Trevor. Forget all of it. Then headlights hit the service road. 3 SUVs. HOA board. Trevor out front. And behind him 6 homeowners including Claire. Nobody looked polished anymore. Trevor's hair was a mess. Shirt untucked. Hands shaking slightly. He walked up carrying a leather folder. Didn't waste time. "We're ready." I said nothing. He opened the folder and handed me the paperwork. 20-year operating agreement. Full preservation rights for the tower. Permanent architectural exemption from all HOA standards. The HOA funds maintenance. The county gets priority access. And there at the bottom, a certified transfer authorization for $560,000 up front into the property trust Grandpa left me. Claire folded her arms and looked straight at Trevor. "Sign it." He hesitated 1 beat too long. Then signed. Board signed after him. I added my name last. My hand honestly shook a little too. Not because of the money. Because Grandpa should have been standing there seeing this. Because after all those years of him quietly protecting everyone, someone had finally been forced to admit what he built mattered. I handed the folder to Claire and climbed the tower 2 steps at a time. Wind slamming against the rails. I unlocked the gate. Powered the battery bank. Flipped the uplink. Then one by one the thermal monitors came alive. Blue indicators. Camera rotation. Signal handshake. Feed transmitting. I stood there with dust in my eyes while the screens lit up and the valley appeared in perfect panoramic view. Fire line glowing west. Trees moving hard east. The whole ridge suddenly visible again. My phone buzzed in under a minute. "Chief Ramirez. We've got visual. Thank you." Then another text. "County aircraft cleared for deployment." Then another. "Active crews rerouting based on tower feed." Below me, Trevor stood in the dirt looking up like he'd just realized the mountain had won this whole argument days ago, and he'd nearly dragged everyone down trying to win a fight with a dead man's watchtower. The craziest part is how quiet everything felt right after the cameras came back online. You'd expect yelling or celebration or somebody clapping like in a movie, but there wasn't any of that. Just wind moving through dry pine and the low mechanical hum of the tower spinning back to life, like it had never really been asleep at all. The monitors fed directly into county command, and within minutes aircraft were moving again. I watched one helicopter cut across the valley, low and fast, heading straight toward the fire line. Another followed behind it. Then came the first water drop. Even from the tower, you could feel that shift, like momentum finally turning. The fire crews had eyes again. Real ones. Live thermal sweep. Wind direction. Heat spread. They weren't guessing anymore. They were moving with precision. I stood there gripping the rail, so hard my knuckles hurt, and for a second I swear I could hear my grandfather's boots on those old cedar steps behind me. I know how that sounds. Maybe it was memory. Maybe adrenaline. Maybe just me being tired and running on coffee and anger for 3 straight days. But I felt him there, calm as ever, like he already knew exactly how this would play out. By late afternoon, the county reported forward progress slowed. By sunset, containment crews had boxed the main burn before it reached the eastern slope above Cedar Hollow. The neighborhood was safe. Smoke still hung in the valley, but the immediate danger passed. People started breathing again. Trevor didn't say much. None of the board did. They just stood around looking drained. Claire finally broke the silence and muttered, "Well, guess the tower stays." I laughed harder than I probably should have. Trevor glanced up at the cedar beams, then looked away fast, like he couldn't stand giving it credit. But credit came anyway. Over the next week, County Fire officially recognized Cedar Watch as a priority monitoring point. They sent technicians up to integrate updated software. They mounted weather sensors, ran backup signal support. For the first time ever, there was a real partnership in writing. And the HOA? Suddenly nobody had concerns about aesthetics anymore. Funny how that works. The legal notice disappeared. Article 11 somehow stopped matching. Nobody brought up compliance. Nobody asked me to repaint. Which, honestly, made the next part even more satisfying. The following spring after snowmelt, I hired a local crew out of Durango. We pressure washed every beam, replaced a few weathered braces, resealed the stairs, and then I painted the whole tower bright wildfire safety orange. Not soft orange. Not tasteful orange. The kind you can spot from half a mountain away. Bright enough to glow against snow. Bright enough to reflect in every giant glass window across Cedar Hollow. It looked incredible. Bold and unapologetic and impossible to ignore. The first time Trevor drove past while I was finishing the upper rails, he slowed almost to a stop. Window halfway down. He stared up for a second and said, "That's very visible." I smiled and nodded. Exactly the point. Then I climbed higher and kept painting while he drove off. Every now and then somebody asks if I regret escalating things. If shutting off the cameras was reckless. If maybe I pushed too hard. And honestly, I've thought about that a lot. More than people realize. Because fire isn't theoretical out here. Neither is responsibility. But here's what I keep coming back to. My grandfather gave that mountain decades of free protection because he believed neighbors should look out for each other. He gave quietly. No invoice. No credit. No demands. And in return, a board decided his work was disposable because it didn't match their preferred color palette. That part never sat right with me. If I had quietly backed down and let them bully me into tearing it apart, they would have learned exactly the wrong lesson. They would have learned that appearances mattered more than substance. That power mattered more than contribution. That if enough people signed a document, they could erase something meaningful. Instead, they learned the opposite. They learned value isn't always polished. Sometimes it creaks. Sometimes paint peels. Sometimes it stands there stubborn for 50 years until people finally understand why it was built in the first place. Cedar Watch is still up there now. Cameras running every day. Weather sensors spinning. County feed live 24/7. And every single evening when sunset hits the ridge, that orange tower catches the last light before anything else in the valley. You can see it from every oversized deck and every perfect window in Cedar Hollow. Trevor still lives downhill. We're civil. Short nods. Quiet hellos. Nothing dramatic. But every time he looks up and sees that tower glowing over the trees, he remembers exactly what nearly happened when he confused appearance with importance. And I'd be lying if I said that part doesn't feel a little satisfying. So now I'm curious, what do you think? Did I go too far shutting down the feed until the HOA backed off? Or did the board bring every bit of that on themselves? If you've ever dealt with an HOA power trip or watched somebody underestimate the wrong neighbor, drop your story in the comments. I read every one. And if you like real community drama with a little justice at the end, stick around, because trust me, mountain neighborhoods always have another story.